Memoirs of a Dad, narrated by Malc Cowle. Chapter 7. Before we head off to Edale and the Bluegrass Festival in May 1986, an explanation of Tom's relationship with his mother, and to a lesser degree myself, is much overdue. Generally speaking, I would drop Tom off to stay with Claire at her home in Longsight on a Friday night, and if we were going out on a ride on the Sunday, pick him up early Sunday morning. Unless there was some special circumstance, this arrangement was only disrupted on bank holidays and school holidays, and Claire always took Tom away for the Christmas period. Separation and divorce can be stressful for any child, and in all too many cases, battling parents often use the child as a weapon in their ongoing disagreements. Thus, stress can become trauma, and all too often catastrophe, for the youngsters concerned. Because Tom was so young when Claire and I separated, the stress upon him was limited, and we had both agreed his interests should be given priority over our own. Both of us struggled financially in his early years, especially when Claire returned to university to obtain the qualifications she needed to obtain work in the future. Nonetheless, she not only contributed to his care, but provided most of his clothes, including some amazing hand-knitted socks, scarves and pullovers. To cut a long story short, I think Tom had as good a relationship with both his parents as any child could have wished for. It was certainly superior to that experienced by a lot of children in so-called traditional nuclear families that I know of. For a start, Tom never witnessed his parents argue. Tom may have a different view of all this, but if he has never expressed it to me. In fact, the only time he ever indicated a problem was in the Levenzoom house. I heard him sobbing in bed one night and went up to ask what was upsetting him. He asked me if Danny and Amy could live with both their parents. Why couldn't he? He'd be about 3 at the time. I explained as best I could that sometimes parents got on better when they were apart, and suggested he needed to look at it in a different way. Unlike Danny and Amy, who had 2 wonderful parents, but only had one home, he had 2 homes, and he was loved in both of them. He immediately brightened up and went off to sleep. More importantly, he never raised the question again, and knowing his character, I am sure he would have done so if he hadn't been happy. Having made this explanation, let's get to the nitty-gritty. I've already mentioned Felix Schmidt, who escaped with his brand new tandem from under the bailiff's very nose, and thus deprived my landlord at the time of the cash he would have paid for it. As you will now be aware, I am a great believer in the importance of manufacturing, and continually berate British capitalists for their complete and utter failure to invest in such manufacturing. Felix had been a regular customer, and like most of my customers had become accustomed to me ranting on about the various cycling products I had to sell that were imported from overseas. By then, apart from the frames, virtually everything on a bicycle had to be imported, either from Japan or France or Italy. Even the inventors of the pneumatic tyre, Dunlops, had now stopped making bicycle tyres, and the favourites were Michelin, manufactured in France, and Schwalbe, manufactured in Germany. One day, he'd come into the shop when I happened to be brandishing a new high-security and expensive bicycle U-lock imported from the United States. What's the problem with British capitalists? I demanded to know. Why the hell can't we invest in manufacturing a simple lot like this? Felix sympathised and asked if he could borrow the lot and do some research. I agreed and promptly forgot about it. Some months later, he brought the lot back, along with another, manufactured in Salford by a small employee-owned enterprise by the name of Manchester Cold Rollers. It was the Cyclops U-lock. As a result of Felix's intervention, and, no doubt, some contribution to its initial design, They not only had a locking system quite different and superior to the American lock, but it was also cheaper. In the January, following the collapse of Medlock Cycles, they offered me a job, working as a draftsman, the job I'd been trained to do, whilst offering me facilities to continue frame building. Naturally, I accepted, subject to my being able to organise my working hours around Tom's requirements. This included finishing early on the eve of bank holidays, so we could cycle out to wherever we went camping. Thus, on the Thursday evening of the last weekend in May, the tandem was once more replete with tent, insulating mats, sleeping bags and cooking equipment, as we made our way up the track to Hollabrook Booth, which was already a bustle of activity, as musicians and their friends completed the preparations for their Bluegrass Festival. Tom was a great fan of any form of folk and traditional music, and Bluegrass was no exception. Claire played tin whistle and mandolin, and Tom often accompanied me to music sessions at the Juicy Arms, an Irish pub on Diva Street in Greenays, behind Manchester University, where a Donegal fiddler, Danny Shovelin by name and road builder by trade, presided over a motley crew of building and engineering workers, students at the Royal Northern College of Music, and other representatives of assorted trades, who were all united in producing wonderful acoustic music. Manchester has always been a city of music, and abounds with such pubs even to this day, although the Juicy is no longer one of them. But in the 1980s it was my clear favourite, not least because the landlady, Marion, always made a great fuss of Tom, and when he wasn't with me, demanded to know why, as if I was neglecting his upbringing. By the time I had the tent pitched and sorted, Tom had already made contact with Rosie's young brood, and it struck me that my main role that particular weekend would be more like that of a casual observer and hanger-on than the main carer of a young boy. And so it was to prove. The festival was a great success, the music brilliant, and Tom in good company. I was able to relax and renew some old acquaintances. By this time, my young son was not only mastering the English language, he had an ability to express himself beyond his years. Not only was his vocabulary quite large, but he had the capacity to speak English in two different ways, not least by changing his accent in different situations. Claire came from a completely different background to myself. I was Lancashire born and bred. Claire had been born on the banks of the River Tamar, on the Devon side, I think, and had subsequently been brought up in Salisbury. My father was a semi-school worker, with little education, because of childhood meningitis. Claire's father was the eldest son of an aristocrat, and was trained in the arts of land management and agriculture. My mother was well educated for a daughter of the working class of her era, but suffered from schizophrenia, and had spent most of my childhood and teenage years in mental hospitals. Claire's mother was a teacher, and by the 1980s deputy headmistress of a prominent public school for girls, one of whose pupils, at the time, was Sasha Knott, the daughter of Thatcher's Navy Minister. Snot for short, as she was known at school, according to Claire's mother. I was the eldest of three brothers, all of whom had been brought up quite separately by different branches of our extended and disparate family. In most respects, we were each brought up as a single child. Claire was the eldest of four sisters and a brother, in a close and cohesive family. Thus, our contrasting class and family backgrounds, and the different parts of the country we had lived in, meant we had different accents, and different regional dialects. Just as Tom was comfortable with moving between two households, so he understood and spoke the languages of both, and could change his mode of speech as and when required. Moreover, no doubt because he was used to the company of adults when cycling, and was privy to conversations on all kinds of subjects, involving his rather opinionated and extremely argumentative dad, he had quickly adopted strong opinions of his own and was not shy in stating them whenever he felt it necessary. I must make it clear at this stage, his views did not necessarily coincide with mine. More often than not they didn't, although we were usually able to achieve a working compromise. We lived in a democratic household where we tended to solve problems through discussion rather than dictate, although I, as chairperson, did retain the casting vote. Nonetheless, I do not say this lightly. Certainly parental violence had had no part in my upbringing, and it had no place in Tom's. We did not agree with the slogan, "Spare the rod and spoil the child," and I do not believe that particular maxim should play any part in the upbringing of any child. The resort to violence is a measure of parental failure and lack of imagination, as well as basic cruelty inflicted on the powerless by the powerful. Oh dear, I'm beginning to rant again. Although I was not aware of it at the time, Tom deployed his verbal talents on a particular occasion on the Saturday of the festival to some effect, whilst displaying his lack of respect for age, status or rank, in circumstances where he felt such respect had not been earned. The following are Tom's own words. Me and the kids had some deck chairs that we brought out from the house. We left them to get some drinks, and when we got back, some adults were sat in them. I demanded them back, and they asked me if I knew who they were. I did not. "We're in excess," came the reply. It was a popular Australian band of the time. "I don't care," said I. "These are our chairs." "What if we give you £10? They asked. "I'd prefer a seat," I explained. So they went and left us to sit and enjoy our drinks. Anna and Matthew said to me, "Tom, they really were in excess." I probably came back with a witty retort, "I'll let you remember it for me, Dad." There ends the quote. I don't remember any witty retort. How could I? I wasn't a witness to this event. However, I am impressed by my son's early recognition that a central seat in a place of musical culture is far superior to naked, cold cash. Clearly money can't buy everything, let alone everybody. Indeed, as my Auntie Dolly always pointed out, learning is far more precious than silver or gold, although a small bit of brass can come in useful when you're desperate and hungry. When Tom finally told me about this incident, his face lit up in a smile, as Edwin Waugh often said, like the gleam of a good deed in a naughty world.